Hello. So just going to do a quick video in response to Gio and Lee's interview today. Gio on Hammer's Chat had Lee Clayton, the head of talkSPORT, on. It's a really good interview and lots of great insight. I certainly learnt a lot from that, and I highly recommend that if you haven't watched it yet, please pause this video right now, watch it, then come back and watch this review, because there's going to be a few spoilers. But I felt the need, as someone that's been quite critical of Lee, to address this, not in a series of tweets, but one video. So first of all, I have to say thanks for Gio for setting this up. Fantastic work, mate. And fair play to Lee Clayton. You've taken a lot of stick from West Ham fans, and you've set most of the record straight. We'll get into that later in the video. But fundamentally, I think one of the tweets I sent you was that, you need to own what's going on talkSPORT, and you need to address this as a West Ham fan. And you have done just that. So fair play. More on that later. But there's a few interesting points that's been happening. So for anyone that isn't aware, talkSPORT have got the eye of West Ham fans because a lot of criticisms that have been going on air at the minute of the fan base, and lots of praise for the board for work that Moyes and the team are doing. So straight into addressing that point, and this is a bit of again, this is how I've got new perception over the situation, is that Lee himself does not have as much say over what goes on the show as we would believe. He's a big advocate for people expressing their opinions and giving their a bit of free speech on the airwaves, rather than imposing his will and his views on the team, his team, and on the people that are guests. So such as, Lee himself says that he cannot tell Simon Jordan what to do, mainly because Simon Jordan will then go and do the opposite, which is a quite funny bit of the interview, I have to say. He does say that he doesn't always agree with what goes on his airwaves, and that although he's not, and it's unfair to expect him to air the dirty laundry of talkSPORT on a chat show, but he does say two examples where he said he spoke with Darren Bent about him saying that West Ham fans would prefer fifth place over an FA Cup. And the same with Martin Keown speaking about West Ham fans at the end of the window. He was texting him while he was on air, he said, which was, an interesting thing, that obviously he's not there in the studio. He mentioned because of COVID, he's not there every day. But equally, he says it goes back to, they're entitled to their opinions, and he wants to bring people in. He has got a good relationship with Martin Keown, and he just disagreed with him on the views on the West Ham fans, because obviously he is a West Ham fan as well. He makes references to sometimes mistakes can be made on air live, or not so much mistakes, but questions you don't want to ask, or sorry, want to ask but don't ask. See, I did one there. Where he references the end of the Man United game. He really hoped the interviewer would have bring up Odubeku being subbed, but didn't. And although he didn't directly compare it to what's going on talkSPORT, you can imagine that sometimes some of these things that are said on talkSPORT are said on air, live on air in the heat of the moment, and then you hear it back and you say, okay, well, that's not necessarily true, such as West Ham fans complaining about Kufal. More on that later. Lee himself came ahead, was obviously fully aware of the issues that West Ham fans have with him. He addressed quite a few of them in almost like an opening statement when he first started speaking to Gio. So that was quite interesting that he was aware of it. And again, as I said at the beginning, fair play, he took it head on and he spoke about it. He claims he's got no relationship with the board. He says that photo of Karren Brady was actually the first and only time he met her. And he's never met David Gold. And the only time he met David Sullivan, and bizarrely, it was after the Stoke game in 2010 when we lost 1-0 and it looked like Zola was going to be sacked. And he said that he was pretty much asked who should be brought in to replace. He was very quick to say that he did not suggest Avram Grant, which again, there's a few funny moments in this interview. Again, I quite enjoyed it for that reason as well. It was quite a calm and relaxed interview given the circumstances. Although Gio did well to hold Lee to account on a few things over Jim White. Jim White, Lee does very well not to say anything negative about his team throughout this interview, and I commend him for that, because it could be quite easy to be drawn in. he does very well he almost avoids Gio's questioning on Jim White a little bit, in my opinion. And I'm not saying he didn't not answer the question, but he answered it in a different way to what I think Gio was asking him. And again, going back to what he said about the interview, when you're in the moment, sometimes you can mishear something. So that could be what's happened. But he was more focused on how Jim gets his information, like the process of it, rather than where he gets it from. He eventually says that he doesn't know, and it's up to Jim to decide. And he doesn't confirm or deny any association with Gold, Sullivan, and Brady for Jim. He simply says, "I don't know." The end of the day, it's likely Lee is not in a place to comment on this, and it can't really be held against him as a journalist himself to not reveal one of his journalist sources. And it's quite a difficult situation for him. But again, I have to say fair play Gio for pushing him on this, and Lee did address some of the stuff, but fundamentally he went back to his first original point, that he wants people on air to say their opinions, and Jim has his opinions. West Ham fans may disagree with them, but those are Jim's opinions. They don't reflect on Lee's. Lee says he's the name on the top of the door. This is a saying that he has, so ultimately he has to own it, and that's all we ask of him. But that's it. So the most important and probably most compelling moment of the interview is Lee actually goes as far as to say, get this, that he would rather Gold and Sullivan be out of the club. I'm not saying he's GSB out by any stretch of imagination, but he did say that he would rather there be new investment and the club be forward in a new direction. Gio directly asked him if talkSPORT would prefer Gold and Sullivan still to be in charge, and he said that it doesn't matter, but as a personal opinion, he would rather them be out of the club. Now that flies in the face of everything people had assumed with him, and if he did have a relationship with the board, I don't think he would be saying that. Let's be clear here. I don't think he'd be saying that. I think he would, if he had a relationship with the board, he would find a way to not answer that question. He would just leave it as talkSPORT don't matter. He didn't need to put his personal opinion in there. So you have to take that on face value. That being said, there are a few things I'm going to quickly say that I disagree with you on, Lee, in this interview, and I'm just going to be straight. So Lee disagreed with the sentiment that fans are agitated and talked over when they're on air. I am sorry, mate, but I have to disagree with that. When Baz goes on there regular, he is talked over, and there's video evidence out there of Jim White smirking, telling Barry to get over it when Barry's been annoyed about investment and stuff. So I'm not having it that they're not agitated. Whether Lee is responsible for that, that's another story, and I don't think Lee is, but I feel that they are talked over, and I feel there is an agitation. I do concur with Lee when he says about the positive stuff, especially, you heard the United fan about how Ollie sent him a nice message when he was talking about depression, and talkSPORT highlighted that. Yeah, great stuff you guys are doing over the pandemic, not taking that away, but there is an element of agitating and talking over fans, and particular West Ham fans, in my opinion. The only positives that are on air are towards the board and rarely Moyes. The Twitter account constantly highlights clips of negative stuff to rile the fans up, but again, just going to keep saying, we thought Lee had a bit more, or I thought Lee had a bit more of a say over everything than he does. He said so himself. He's not necessarily in charge of the social media. Can we hold that against him? I think it would be a bit unfair to directly blame him for stuff like that. And also I couldn't imagine Lee wanting to bury his own broadcast by admitting that, saying, "Oh yeah, you've got me. talkSPORT are we're there to wind up fans, and I have a relationship with the board." He's never going to say that, and he's not in his place to say that, and I wouldn't expect him to say that. On that thing with the board, I think there is a bit more of a relationship maybe that Lee lets on, but equally that would then be revealing his sources. Journalists have their sources. It wouldn't surprise me if he did get some stuff from the board, as every journalist would. It's his job, But equally, he wouldn't be saying he'd rather them be gone if he had that relationship going back to that point. So I think we can firmly dismiss this idea that Lee is very much in with the board, in my opinion. Feel free to tweet me saying I'm wrong, but that's my opinion on that. You have to take what he says on face value. and he did say some anti-board stuff and said that he didn't agree with the transfer policy. He made reference to the scattergun approach that I've made reference to just the other day on the West Ham way, that the 16-17 season he didn't have a clue what the identity of the club was, you know. I believe he's a lot more aware of what's going on with the presenters personally, but he, you know, again, he wants people to be free to express their views on their show. So, you know, you can't fault him. You can't tell him how to run his own show. Moving forwards, ultimately, I think it would be really good if Lee Clayton and other people that have got the ire of West Ham fans, maybe, that if they want to pop up on fan channels every once in a while. I'm not saying Lee should have a monthly column on Hammer's Chat, but if he wants to come on again in a few months' time as a regular guest, if he wants to come on the West Ham Way or Garage Football, that would be grand. And that way they can, you know, you can have that line of communication. Equally, he could say, look, I've said what I had to say. I've addressed the issues. He doesn't need to do that again. But I just think, you know, it'd be good if he could do that. And I think us as a fan base do need to back off him a little. You know, he mentioned in a few comments on the abuse he gets on social media. Now, I myself have tweeted him some stuff in frustration. I've questioned him. I questioned him quite vigorously the other day about the Kufel statement. But equally, that was, again, to put it back to it, that's when I thought that he was much more in charge of what was said on air than he has revealed. If anything I've said has gone into that abuse column that you feel, Lee, I can only apologise, mate. It was not really my intention. I may have said one or two things in anger. We did have a bit of a disagreement over Sebastian Haller smiling, if you remember. We're still going to disagree on that, I think, but it's done. He's no longer a West Ham player, and I don't think it needs to be an issue anymore, really. You know, he freely admits, as I said a few times, I'm going to say it again, he freely admits in this interview that his name is on the top of talkSPORT, so he needs to have an element of responsibility about what's said on air, and that is all I really can ask of him, for him to own it. But that was when it did appear that he was telling people to go on there and say this about the fans. I'll say this. That's not the case. We know that now from this interview, and that's why I'm quite happy he's done this interview. And, you know, thanks, Lee, for putting that out there. Thanks, Gio, for organising it. And if you've watched my rambling 12.5 minutes, Phil, coming on 13 minutes now about this, thank you for watching. And let me know what you think about this interview. Cheers. Take care.